Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
What we have here on the wall, we have 8-3 zone, which means 8 Trey gangster Crips. It's a set within the Crips that's marking their territory.
Gang symbols. They're showing up on city streets, in school playgrounds. But is gang graffiti really a sign of a serious gang problem? How real is the threat? How effective the official response? Gangs, up next on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
The murder rate goes up. The Attorney General blames gangs. Cops in Newark are shot. Officials warn of a possible gang connection. Street drug sales? Authorities say they're controlled by gangs. But are gang fears being oversold? I'm Raymond Brown, and on this edition of Due Process, just how real is the gang threat? We'll get some very different answers in this half hour. But first, as always, Sandy King starts us off with a view from the streets and the cinema.
And Raymond, when you start to look for gangs on film, you find they're simply everywhere. From the organized crime types of The Godfather to the extraterrestrials of Star Wars. But when we talk about gangs these days, we're talking Bloods and Crips and Latin Kings. Something like the Sharks and the Jets of West Side Story, but nearly a half century later, and light years more violent.
As a young and dumb and gun in the waist, so cracked that those who couldn't take the pain and had to numb it with bass. Couldn't drink the
It is in the music, in the dress, on the walls.
Life's like a treadmill, running in place, getting nowhere fast.
What we have here on the wall, we have 8-3 zone, which means 8 Trey gangster Crips.
It's in the popular culture. And it has been for nearly a half century.
You're never alone. You're never disconnected. You're home with your own. When company's expected, you're well protected.
Still, the Sharks and the Jets were never quite like this. But does gang style spell gang threat? Are gangs really the problem they're cracked up to be?
It's very real. We in New Jersey are where California was about 20 years ago. The gangs are here, the same gangs that are in Bloods, Crips, Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation.
The California-style drive-bys haven't yet become common here.
Hey, Blood.
But authorities say there are Bloods and Crips.
The street-level narcotics trade is controlled by these young men and women. They sell it, they buy it, and they protect certain turf.
And that's just the beginning of gang life in this state.
Remember, there are variations. It's not just Bloods and Crips.
A life that is said to extend into our schools.
We need to know every time something like that crops up, especially the crown. If you got crowns inside of the school, then you know that the kings are there.
A life fueled by the lucrative violent drug trade.
Nobody in the gang basically has a job, because once you see everybody on the street making anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 in 4 or 5 hours, you're not going to want to go work for 8 hours a day, coming home with $180 in your pocket.
This state prisoner says he was a gang member for years until he made the risky decision to get out.
I made the decision to get in it. I had to live with it.
So he asked us to protect his anonymity, and in return gave us a view from inside prison walls.
Whether you're on the street or in prison, everything is based on money and intimidation.
And inside the gangs.
You got Bloods fighting Bloods, Crips fighting Crips. They say Bloods are fighting Crips, Bloods are shooting Crips. You got them killing each other, killing their own people.
And last summer, after 3 Newark cops were shot in the course of just 2 weeks, came the charge that gang members might also be on a campaign to kill police.
Over here you have cop killer with a C going up.
The Department of Corrections did receive information. It was not verified.
Right.
However, we will take precautions, all police agencies, and I'm speaking for the Newark Police Department. We will treat the threat as a valid threat until otherwise.
I understand they say they're trying to protect themselves, but they got guns, they got license to kill, we don't. So that's what they're gonna say anyway.
In fact, some gang members and community advocates called a news conference to say, not true.
An unfounded kind of accusation like this creates the kind of hysteria that makes the whole city unsafe.
And the gang said it was they, not the cops, who were being targeted unfairly.
It is not illegal to be part of a gang. It is not illegal to wear a red t-shirt, purple or blue bandana. However, there is an unwritten law that Blood gang members are fair game.
But the Blood red and the Crip blue may be more than just a fashion statement.
It's mostly about drugs. It's also about guns. A lot of the gun violence that you see in the state, in the street, is as a result of this gang warfare and gang conflict.
And though there's said to be a gang truce in effect,
it's a peace treaty. You see, it's a part of a peace treaty, so that's what we're about, peace. We ain't about violence.
Cops say that the violence continues.
But they just indiscriminately go out there and shoot at each other, shoot one another. Sometimes the ritual for joining a gang might be, you might be required to do a drive-by shooting.
And so does the appeal of gang life.
It's always going to be gangs, man. There's always going to be fighting.
We have gangs because somewhere along the line, America's institutions have failed young people, and so they take on another family. Gangs are families. They give protection, they give guidance, they give affirmation.
I didn't want to make the money the way my parents did it because I saw how broken down and beat up they came home after work to make money just to support me and my brothers. I didn't want to make my money like that. I wanted to make my money the easy way.
Recently in Newark, the Bloods and the Crips, on their own initiative, decided this is enough, we're tired. But then they said to the older generation and to the politicians, you have to help us get jobs. We're ready to go to school, we want jobs, we want out.
So many of these kids don't see beyond a couple of years, and many think they'll be dead by the time they're 21. So you have to show them that there's a vision of themselves at age 25, at age 30, at age 35. Part of this process is demystifying achievement and success to these young people.
And few statistics are more sobering than the state's last uniform crime report, released in October. It showed a spike in homicides, especially among the young. Young men aged 20 to 24 accounted for more than 20% of the murders in New Jersey. And Attorney General Peter Harvey says that is directly related to what he sees as a spike in gang activity, gang rivalries, gang drug trade, even gang initiations. So what's the answer? Well, Harvey says it's a multi-pronged approach, encompassing everything from stepped-up prosecutions to midnight basketball, and not just in places like Newark and Irvington. If Harvey's right, suburban schools and parents have reason to worry too. The gang virus, he says, is spreading.
And when we come back, we'll hear from a leader of the State Police Gang Unit, a part of Harvey's new gang initiatives, from a Rutgers gang researcher, and from the Newark deputy mayor who helped negotiate the gang truce in New Jersey's largest city.
I think a lot of gang violence revolves around drugs, selling drugs, all that.
Put more money into education, after-school services and programs where children can go and have a place to belong.
It's all in the parenting, you know. People have to, really learn how to teach their kids to respect other people.
If we don't get together as adults to work together and really save our children and to really believe that they're worth saving, it's not going to happen.
They are glamorizing the gang life, they're glamorizing the thug life.
A lot of young kids are dying before their time with a gang. It's not good at all.
So is it just so much law enforcement hype, or do gangs really threaten our communities and our kids? In towns like Newark and Irvington, is there crisis or is there truce? For some very different answers, we turn to Lori Scott Pickens, who does gang research at the Police Institute of the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice, and Lieutenant Keith Bavakwi, the gang expert at the New Jersey State Police. And with us from Newark, Deputy Mayor Ras Baraka, an educator activist at the center of the struggle to make peace between Crips and Bloods, between gangs and police. Welcome to all of you. Lieutenant Bavakwi, let me start with you. You've spent 15 of your 19 years in law enforcement focused on gang-related issues. We see a rise in crime among the age group that one would associate with gangs, but the question remains, is that rise because of gang-related activity, or are there other factors that explain it, and gangs coexist with an otherwise significant increase in crime?
Yeah, I know we feel over in the state police and in the law enforcement community that gangs do have a lot to do with the violence. Violence is inherent in gang activity. That's why we need to step up, working with a coactive approach with the communities to address the gang problem, because law enforcement cannot do this alone to address the problem.
Ras Baraka, you work with both parents in your role as a vice president of Wequahic, but also citizens of Newark at large in your role as deputy mayor. Is this, the question of gangs, a principal issue about which people should be concerned in the crime context, or are there a host of other equally important issues?
Sure, I want to say that one, the gang issue is relevant enough to be discussed and be dealt with, because the presence of gangs in the schools and in the communities is clearly obvious, and the kind of activities that they are involved in need to be addressed. But there are also other elements of crime that exist in our community that's outside of gang-related activity that automatically gets thrown towards gangs. So, I mean, there are some other issues that need to be addressed.
But you do believe it's a significant part of the problem?
Sure, it's a very significant part of the problem.
Now, you were recently involved in the spring in brokering what was at least described as a truce. Is that a truce that still continues to have some impact in Newark or not?
Well, what people have to understand is that these gangs are not one monolithic kind of group where, you know, you have just the Bloods and you have Crips. I mean, there are different subsets of Bloods and different subsets of Crips. Some of those subsets came together to say that they were going to have a truce between one another in certain areas of the city. So you have some parts of the city that have not been impacted by the kind of peace treaty activity at all.
Are there sections of Newark that you would argue are experiencing benefits from the truce?
Sure, I think there are places that have experienced some kind of marginal differences and changes in their community. Different kids are...
When you say marginal, Ras, I don't want to take advantage of your words, but do you mean something small or something significant in terms of the crime picture, even in a particular section of Newark?
Well, when I say marginal, I mean that it is it's slow and it's developing, that there is a element of peace that's there. People can go certain places. There are individuals who talk to one another. I wouldn't say that it's a permanent kind of peace, because that stuff needs to be developed, and there are other things that need to be interjected in that.
But would you go so far as to say that most gang members in Newark and Irvington have called and abided by a truce, or no?
Most of them, no. Okay. I think that there's a significant number, yes.
Okay. Lieutenant, what do you think in terms of viable strategy? Is the idea of a truce viable, or are the gangs so segmented that the fact that some leaders may agree to a truce doesn't have much?
No, I thought what they did was an initial step in reaching out to them to improve the quality of life and to stop the violence between those groups of gang members, whether it's Crips and Bloods or what other subsets are fighting with each other. And it did have an initial effect, but we need to stay up on that further. We need to keep going out to these at-risk youth or gang members and provide them something other than handcuffs and prison time.
Well, community leaders brokering a truce is a different kind of approach than more vigorous prosecution from top to bottom.
Absolutely.
Are they inconsistent? Can they coexist?
Sure, I think anything can coexist as long as you get the heads of whether a ward or a organization or a police entity together and discuss what the problems the community is facing. That's what it's all about. It's the coactive approach. It's the law enforcement can't do this alone. The community needs training and education, and we need to provide jobs and opportunities to our children that are at risk to joining gangs.
Lori Scott Pickens, why are so many youth drawn to the gang phenomenon?
I don't know if I know the answer to that, because I think there's a lot of elements that contribute to the fascination of gangs. There are some theories out there about parenting. There are some theories about the sense of family that gangs provide. There's some things about, some thinking about...
But you've spent some time in the last year talking to gang members about these things, or to ex-gang members. What do you think they would identify as the primary motivation, if there is one, for kids to join gangs?
A sense of belonging and security would be the two major things that I heard in discussions with those individuals.
Ras Baraka, if you talk to people in Newark and around the country, there are folks who tend to associate gang membership with some parts of hip-hop culture, with thug life. I mean, is that a reality, or is that a red herring?
Well, I think that what rappers do and hip-hop do is kind of discuss what's happening in the community, and gangs do exist in our neighborhoods and communities, so they begin to talk about that and discuss those things in their rhymes and reiterate some of that stuff. And you know, people really really don't understand what's happening in those neighborhoods or what these rappers are talking about, so automatically they suggest that rap music is contributing to gang life or thug life.
But you believe it does not, then? You think that that's a false connection between parts of hip-hop culture and...
No, I wouldn't put that on hip-hop culture as a whole. I think that American culture at this point is very violent and very misogynist, and you know, hip-hop is not divorced from that. So you have some elements of or individuals in hip-hop music who, you know, purport this kind of violence, or who exacerbate the kind of street life that exists. You know, they romanticize it to sell records and sell albums.
So you would think that if a kid listened to what's called gangster rap from young age forward, that wouldn't make him more inclined to be open to the gang experience?
Well, I think if a kid is already involved in gang activity, and a rapper talks about this kind of thug life or gang life in a kind of romantic way, it kind of gives him some kind of support to be involved in that life. Yes, I agree with that. But I do want to say there are also other rappers and other artists who do the reverse, who are talking about different things in the community that kind of try to tell kids to get involved with other things. I just don't want to put a blanket on rap music.
But I think that's where our parents need to get involved in what our children are listening to. Where Mr. Baraka is discussing the rappers are out there using a positive message in their song. We need to not let our kids listen to the negative side of the rap music with the gangster rap.
So you believe that that the culture or the music
the media glorifies gang violence. Look at the Sony PlayStation game, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
That's right.
It's all about what you can do as a gang member.
Right.
Shooting a rocket launcher at an airplane, doing a drive-by shooting, spray painting graffiti. I mean, that affects the community. The graffiti affects the community just as anything, but they're seeing it in games that they're playing.
But let me come back to something
what about,
you do. Go ahead, Ralph.
What about, like, we automatically say, we get on the rappers for saying different things in their music. These record companies, these people who produce the games, like, you know, San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto, no one talks to them about kind of marketing and distributing this kind of gang life and violence to our children, and promoting that. And I think that needs to be discussed as well.
Well, then how can we have a strategy to address that this doesn't address, well, the gang members don't manufacture guns, they don't import drugs from South America.
Right.
They presumably are not involved, as Ross suggests, in the manufacture of any negative or the distribution of bad music. Then how do you devise a strategy that takes into account that sources outside the community?
You need private sector involved in this as well. The famous proverb that's out there, it takes a whole community to raise a child. Well, that's everybody that's involved in the community, from private sector businesses to the people that live in there. Everybody has to be a shareholder in doing something to improve the community with gang violence.
But I think it speaks to the larger issue of collaboration. And one of the components of the Police Institute is the Greater Newark Safer Cities Initiative. Thereby, all of the law enforcement, community leaders, clergy, service and treatment providers wrap their arm and own the problem of violence to try to do something about it collectively. And that's important. You can't get away from working together as a group.
No, you have to.
You have to take a holistic approach to dealing with the problem.
Given the breadth of the problem we've talked about, which obviously involves many forces outside the community, and the fact is there was juvenile crime in New Jersey before the gang phenomena began to increase in size. Where is there anywhere a cohesive strategy that takes into account both these outside forces and the pre-existing problems?
Well, I think what Lori just said.
Go Ross, you were going to say?
I mean, I think that's the problem, that doesn't exist. We don't have a coordinated intervention strategy. I mean, in other states around the country, the people that have been dealing with gang problems for over 15, 20 years, they have a coordinated effort that's going on that Ms. Pickens spoke of, that involves the education system, that involves law enforcement, that involves not-for-profits and the private sector coming together to kind of try to create safe havens, prevention strategies and intervention strategies for young people, so people who are already in gangs, as well as a strategy for people who are susceptible to becoming involved in gang life themselves. And we have not come together to develop that.
Let me come back to you, because the Attorney General has said on this show and elsewhere that this is a top priority.
Absolutely.
Yet you have somebody who's a community activist, clearly involved constructively in dealing with this problem, saying we don't really have a coordinated, cohesive attack on all levels of the problem.
I would have to agree to a certain extent. I know Senator Ron Rice has some pending legislation to initiate a gangland security task force, and that's not something to having law enforcement coming out there in with greater resource to go out there and affect the arrest of gang members. That's what it's about. It's about getting people from different entities together to discuss problem solving with gangs. I know there's a proposal on there to have private sector, to have people from the community sit on this panel as well, to discuss where we can go and what we can do together and what we have to do, what measures we need to take in order to stop the violence and improve what
But let me ask you a question that may come from some folks who have to deal with the tough end of the stick, which is being on the streets in the evening or feeling unsafe and saying, well, all the things you're talking about and even Mr. Baraka's talking about really amount to coddling some really bad characters. How do you respond to people who, from the point of fear and of being victims, say that's what you're doing?
You know, that is true terrorism, to come to wake up every morning to live in a community that's plagued by gangs. Yeah, it's true terrorism. And what we have to do, again, is on my side of the house, the law enforcement, is to do more than just enforcement and suppression. We have to do intervention and prevention and get involved with training.
But when you use the word terrorist, and I know you're not saying it rhetorically, does that mean that Ross was negotiating with terrorists? Ross, do you get that criticism at all?
Oh, yeah, I get the same criticism Jesus got. You know, I'm cohorting with all kinds of lowlifes and thugs. But I look at these kids are not dropped out of the sky by, you know, unidentified flying objects or brought over here, you know, in buses. They're our children, our neighborhoods. We basically know them. We know their parents, the people who try to raise them. And it's our job, especially if we're not law enforcement, if we're not officers, it's our job to make sure that the kind of crime that exists stops.
Laura, you work with folks who have parents. Do you have kids yourself?
Yes, I have a daughter.
So one of the folks who was interviewed as part of our show said it's all in the parenting. Is that too strong, or is there a strong parental component that has to be considered?
I think parental component is a very strong issue. I think that you have to be engaged and involved in what your children are engaged and involved in.
Be specific.
You have to listen to their music. You have to know their friends. That old saying, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your child is? You should know where your child is.
Okay, but then what do you and Ross have to say about kids who don't have a parent in the home capable of exerting that influence?
That speaks to that support of the community wrapping their arms around the problem. And you know, I commend Mr. Baraka in terms of listening to the voice of those in the community who are considered part of the problem. They have a voice. I've done that as well. They have a voice and they have feelings about what should be done.
We can see that Ross only has two arms. Has our community in large enough numbers and in great enough strength embraced the kids who don't have direct parental involvement in their life? Ross?
Well, I think that it is large enough. I think that we have enough resources, enough capacity to do the kind of things that we need to do in our communities. Is it being done is the question. And everyone talks about it takes a village. I think at this point, it's safe to say that our village has been a little destroyed, and we have to begin to try to put this village back together.
Are the state police part of the village as you see it?
Yes, I think the police, every entity that's involved in our neighborhood is a part of this village, whether it be government, school.
And Ross, 5 years from now, when we revisit this subject, will we be talking about a decline in gang membership in Essex County around the state, or an increase?
If we do what we're supposed to do, we'll be talking about a decline, yes.
And if you agree with him, Lieutenant, what do you think is most likely to bring about that decline?
I think that providing an awareness and recognition to start, getting to the parents like the Attorney General Harvey did with the latest video. It was geared to the parental audience, that video, which is on the internet, that it's going to be distributed in the communities as well.
Let me give Lori a last word, because Lori, you think increase or decrease over the next 5 years?
I think we're going to see a decrease, and whether it's a small amount or a large amount, I think we're going to see a decrease because people are talking to each other, and this whole issue of gangs is being looked at as like a public health model. Intervention, prevention,
Russ,
and
is the
aftercare.
truce likely to expand?
Yes, I think we're doing the right things and giving the kids the right kind of resources to make truce something that's, you know, likable to other kids.
Are you going to learn hip hop as part of your?
I have.
Okay, so that's part of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have.
But we have to come back and have you show some of that to us. But for now, that's it for this edition of Due Process. We'll be back next week, of course, with another cutting-edge issue of law and social justice. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
I was glorifying the lifestyle. I mean, I looked down the street, I saw the pimps, the hustlers, the gangbangers, you know, with the big Cuban link chains, the fat gold watches, driving the fancy cars with girls always chasing them. And that's the lifestyle I wanted to live. I didn't want to make the money the way my parents did it, because I saw how broken down and beat up they came home after work to make money just to support me and my brothers. I didn't want to make my money like that. I wanted to make my money the easy way. So then what I did was, the way I'm focused on a plan now to be a positive member of society, that's the same way I was focused on living that lifestyle.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,